The first time the Dawn saw Michael Bones, they mistook him for the sea, not because he rose from it, but because the water around him behaved as if it recognized him. He stood on the shattered prow of a half-sunk brigantine off the Flagler Coast, boots planted wide on planks burned down to ribs. The wreck listed in black water, waves striking its flanks with deliberate rhythm, not the chaotic slap of wind and current, but something slower, measured, as if the ocean itself were breathing. Moonlight silvered his long blonde hair, catching on salt-stiffened strands as the wind dragged them across his brow. His coat, dark and heavy and worn thin at the cuffs, snapped behind him like a banner stolen from a forgotten fleet. Beneath it, leather straps crossed his chest, securing rolled charts and the hilts of knives that had seen more ports than most men ever would. Behind him, the storm gathered, clouds stacked along the horizon, bruised and swollen, lightning pulsing within them like the slow beat of some colossal heart. The sea between storm and wreck flattened unnaturally, swell smoothing as if pressed down by an unseen hand. From the deck of the Dawn flagship Radiant Oath, the figure looked unreal, a man-shaped silhouette standing where no man should stand, unmoving as the tide slid beneath him. He might be a ghost, someone murmured along the rail. Lieutenant Alara Wynne lowered her spyglass, her fingers tight around the polished brass. "Captain," she said quietly. "It's him." Captain Sarah Vale did not take the glass. She did not need to. She had memorized those eyes from reports and rumor, from sketches smuggled out of ports and half-burned notices nailed to tavern walls. Blue like the deep water beyond Turtle Bay, where fishermen cross themselves and turn back without ever agreeing why. "Michael Bones," Sarah said, his name flat and heavy. Around her, the Dawn fleet held perfect formation. 6 warships cut the water in a measured half-circle, hulls aligned with mathematical precision. Nexu lamps along their rails glowed a steady white, mana carefully balanced and disciplined. Sailors stood at stations in polished cuirasses, dawn sigils bright against their cloaks, every movement drilled and purposeful. Between them and the wreck, the sea should have churned. It did not. It lay still, dark, and watchful. "He's alone," Alara said, tension threading her voice. His other ships scattered when the squall hit. His network failed tonight. Sarah's jaw tightened. Michael Bones, the pirate without a crown, the strategist who seemed to know Dawn patrol routes before they were written, the man whose name dockworkers whisper with dread and a strange grudging gratitude. A man like that was never truly alone. "He's buying time," Sarah said. "Ask yourself why he'd let us see him." As if answering her, a wave rose and smashed against the brigantine's side, sending white spray high into the air. It drenched the man from boots to shoulders, water cascading off his coat and hair. Michael Bones did not flinch. He turned his head. Slowly, deliberately, he looked directly at the Radiant Oath, at her. Sarah felt it then, not fear, not awe, but something older, deeper, crawling along her spine like a memory she did not possess. Recognition. "What is he?" Alara whispered. Sarah raised the spyglass at last. Through polished crystal, the man sharpened into detail, stubble shadowing his jaw, old scars at his throat, where a rope had once bitten deep. His bare hands rested easily on splintered wood, fingers relaxed, as if the sea beneath him were solid ground, and his eyes, when they met hers across moonlit water, were not wild or hungry. They were tired and impossibly old. Michael Bones lifted 2 fingers in a sailor's mock salute. Then the sky tore open behind the Dawn fleet. A green flare screamed upward from the darkness, arcing high before bursting into light. For a heartbeat, the sea was painted emerald, every wave crest etched in unnatural clarity. "Alara," Sarah snapped. "Behind us!" The lieutenant spun, already shouting orders. Lanterns bloomed in the darkness beyond the Dawn formation, dozens of them, flickering to life in rapid succession, sails unfurled like wings, low-slung cutters and smugglers' sloops emerging from the night, hulls painted in blues and grays that swallowed moonlight. At their center cut a sleek 3-masted cruiser, lanterns hooded in green glass. Its figurehead, a laughing skull crowned in kelp, gleamed wetly. The sea's answer, "Of course." Sarah's teeth ground together. "Signal the fleet. Hold formation. No one breaks line." Shouts rippled across the Dawn decks. Nexu lamps flared brighter as Windaline mages raised their hands, calling gusts into sails. Chains clanked as anchors were half-hauled, helmsmen fighting the subtle, treacherous current that slid sideways beneath them. Michael Bones had chosen his ground well, just outside the Flagler Coast, where shallow bars lurked beneath deceptively calm water, where the tide bent and twisted against submerged stone. Sarah knew the hazard. She also knew Bones knew she knew. He was gambling on the one thing no doctrine fully accounted for. Panic. Helm. 5 degrees starboard, Sarah barked. Slow, slow. We ride the edge. She glanced back toward the wreck. It was empty. The shattered prow jutted from the water like a broken tooth, rain beginning to spit around it. Of Michael Bones, there was no sign. He had stood just long enough to be seen, just long enough to be remembered. The Sea's answer swung broadside, sails catching wind that seemed to appear from nowhere. Smugglers' ships cut through the rear of the Dawn formation like knives through cloth, grapnels flying, ropes snapping taut. Captain Vale, a voice boomed across the water. Sarah's head snapped up. Michael Bones stood on the quarterdeck of the Sea's answer, one hand resting lightly on the rail as if the ship answered to his touch. His coat streamed behind him, rain slicking his hair down his back. You're drifting, he called, tone almost conversational. You'll want to turn before the current takes you somewhere. Unfortunate. Fire, someone shouted. No, Sarah roared. Hold. A Dawn sloop lurched as its keel scraped hidden stone. Another followed, then another, formation buckling as captains fought the water instead of the enemy. Michael Bones watched it unfold with quiet focus. This was not spectacle. This was orchestration. By the time the storm fully broke, wind screaming, rain lashing down in sheets, the Dawn fleet was scattered, battered, forced to retreat toward deeper water. The Sea's answer vanished into the squall, and Michael Bones became, in that moment, more than a man. He became a story. Hours later, far north of Turtle Bay, Michael Bones sat at a battered oak table in a cove fishermen swore did not exist, and listened to the sea breathe. The cove was a wound in the cliff, narrow and jagged, invisible unless one knew the exact angle of approach and the precise shape of foam to watch for. The walls rose steep around it, volcanic stone veined with pale streaks of salt and age. A single narrow channel led out to open water masked by shadow and spray. Lanterns hung from iron hooks driven into the stone, their light casting wavering gold across maps and ledgers spread like a surgeon's tools. Red pins marked Dawn ports and strongholds. Blue threads traced supply lines, smuggling routes, quiet villages the Dawn taxed and forgot. Jonas Gale paced the length of the chamber, fury rolling off him in waves. You had them, Jonas snapped, hands chopping the air. Radiant oath, locked in the shoals. 10 more minutes and Vale would have been fish food. Michael did not look up from the map. No, he said calmly, she wouldn't. Jonas stopped pacing. You're telling me sinking the Sun's hound wouldn't have. If we kill her, Michael said, finally lifting his gaze, the Dawn sends someone who doesn't hesitate. The words landed with weight. Jonas exhaled sharply through his nose, then scrubbed a hand over his face. You walked into their sight on purpose. Yes. Stood on that wreck like a damn monument. Yes. Why? Jonas demanded. You enjoy being hunted? Michael leaned back in his chair, wood creaking beneath him. I enjoy being understood, he said quietly. Jonas scoffed. By the Dawn? By the people watching the Dawn, Michael corrected. He gestured at the map. I didn't stand there to win a battle, he continued. I stood there to become a question. Jonas frowned. A question. What happens? Michael said softly. When the monster refuses to roar, Jonas stared at him. You're playing with legend. Michael's mouth curved faintly. Legend was already there, he said. I'm just choosing its shape. Outside the cove, the sea rolled against stone, steady and patient. Once, long before dawn banners or pirate flags, long before empires rose and burned, the sea had answered his name with worship. He had learned the cost of that victory the hard way, and he would not pay it again. Before there were pirate songs and wanted notices nailed to harbor posts, there was a war the world would try very hard to forget. The Akuma did not rise quietly. In 2037 AD, they came like a fever, first as whispers in data streams and broken Nexu readings, then as kings of inevitability. They crowned themselves masters of reality, bending Nexu until it screamed, tearing open the boundaries between flesh and idea. Cities drowned without water, forests burned without flame. The sky learned new colors it could not forget, and the divines were forced to answer. The Akuma had anchored a citadel in the Pacific Trench, a mass of black geometry fused to the seabed, pulsing with stolen Nexu. They believed the deep was empty. They believed pressure and darkness were enough to keep even gods away. The Forgotten War would last until 2071 AD, and Michael would fight on a dozen fronts, storming coasts where reality frayed, flooding sanctums carved into impossible dimensions, dragging false gods screaming into depths they could not comprehend. He was not alone. All divines stood together, including the seven primordials: water, fire, earth, nature, electric, wind, and shadow. Together they broke the Akuma's grip on the world. Victory came at a cost no ledger could tally. When the last Akuma fell, the world did not rejoice. It knelt. Temples rose where ruins still smoked. Men and women begged the divines to rule, to never leave, to take control so mortals would never again have to fear what they could become. Michael stood among the others as worship rolled in like a tide. He felt it sink hooks into the world. And he remembered something older than victory. Power did not corrupt. Power invited surrender. It made men smaller. It made gods tyrants without ever needing malice. He turned to the others, those who would later be called divines in scripture and curse. "If we stay," Michael said, voice echoing across a ruined coastline, "we will become what the Akuma were trying to be." Some argued. Some believed mortals needed shepherds. Michael did not. He had seen what happened when oceans were told to obey prayers instead of gravity. In the years that followed, the divines stepped away. Not dead, not diminished, veiled. They let worship fade into story, let miracles become memory, let the world believe the war had ended because mortals had endured. Michael took to the sea, at first openly. He calmed storms, guided ships, answered prayers from fishermen who did not know his name but knew his mercy. But even that created dependency. So he stopped. He learned to walk the decks like a man, to bleed when cut, to age when it suited him, to drown cities only in rumor. Names came and went. Sailor, navigator, priest once, briefly, disastrously. Dawn acolyte for a handful of years before they realized he asked too many questions about where their grain went during famines. Eventually, he found piracy. Not the kind sung about in taverns, the necessary kind. He learned trade routes and tide schedules, learned which dawn caravels carried medicine and which carried gold, learned which villages starved quietly while Dawnhold's vaults grew fat. And when he took to the sea under the name Michael Blackbones, it was not because he wanted fear. It was because fear moved faster than truth. The night after Flagler Coast, Michael sat in the cove and listened to the sea until Jonas finally stopped pacing. "You ever wonder," Jonas said, quieter now, "why the dawn hates you so much?" Michael did not look up. "Because I embarrassed them." Jonas snorted. "Plenty of pirates do that." "Yes," Michael said, "but pirates steal coin. I steal certainty." Jonas frowned. "You never talk about where you learned all this." Michael's fingers stilled on the map. "There was a war," he said. Jonas waited. "A war where gods learn what happens when they stay too long." Jonas swallowed. "You talk like you were there." Michael's mouth twitched. "I was." Jonas laughed once, sharp and disbelieving, then stopped when Michael met his gaze. The sea rolled outside, patient. Clara Avery had always suspected, not because Michael slipped, but because patterns did. She had been born into a world already shaped by aftermath, archives rewritten, timelines sanded smooth. She learned early that the truth did not vanish. It fragmented. She followed fragments. Trade manifests that contradicted public doctrine, dawn records that referenced pre-dawn oaths, Nexu fluctuations that repeated every few centuries in the same places, like scars flaring in cold weather. Michael Blackbones was not the anomaly. He was the constant. The night she brought him the dawn projections, she saw confirmation settle behind his eyes, not surprise, but acceptance. "They're afraid of the future," Clara said, standing at the map table. "Not you." Michael nodded. "Because I can die." Clara's brow furrowed. "You're assuming that." "I'm certain of it," he replied. She hesitated. "Because of the successor echo?" "Yes." "Because you'll give it away?" "Yes." "And that will kill you." Michael's voice was calm. "Yes." Silence stretched between them. "You're not obligated," Clara said finally. "You're a divine. You could vanish again. Let the sea choose someone else later." Michael looked out toward the black water beyond the cove. "The sea already chose," he said, "long before I knew how." Clara folded her arms. "You won't even meet them." "No." "Won't see what they become." "No." She shook her head. "Then why fight this hard?" Michael turned back to her. "Because I remember what the world looks like when gods refuse to leave," he said, "and I will not hand that burden to someone who hasn't even been born yet." Clara exhaled slowly. "You're building a future you'll never live in," she said. Michael smiled faintly. "That's the only kind worth building. Far away in Dawnhold, The Dawn Council argued beneath vaulted stone. Michael Bones's name passed between them like a blade. He is not merely a pirate, one sage said. He is a destabilizing vector. He erodes faith, another snapped. He reminds people the dawn had beginnings, a third said quietly. And beginnings imply change. That was the fear, not death. He knows too much, the High Sun said, and he refuses the shape we give him. Then give him a shape he cannot escape, an exorcist replied. Thus the Seraphim Protocol was born, not to kill Michael Bones, but to bind the idea of him, to turn legend into a cage, to anchor the future to the Dawn's version of history. They did not understand what they were attempting. You cannot bind a god who has already refused godhood, and you cannot imprison a future that has not yet arrived. Michael felt the shift weeks before Blackwater Reach. The sea grew tense around certain islands. Nexu lines hummed in old, uncomfortable ways. He dreamed of pressure, not drowning, but depth without end. The echo was strengthening, not a voice, not a face, something mortal, something stubborn, something that would one day stand where he stood and choose to end him so the sea could continue without gods. Michael woke one night on the sea's answer, rain lashing the deck, and laughed softly into the storm. Poor bastard, he murmured, not of himself, but of the one who would come after. He turned his face into the wind. The sea answered, with worship, with understanding. The dawn did not fear Michael Bones because he sank ships. Ships could be rebuilt, sailors replaced, gold reclaimed. They feared him because people listened after he left. In ports along the Flagler Coast, merchants began asking uncomfortable questions. Why did dawn caravels always depart heavy and return light? Why did villages that paid full tithes still receive half rations? Why did patrols arrive swiftly when smugglers struck, but days late when famine did? These were not revolutionary thoughts. They were curious ones, and curiosity was the one thing the Dawn had never learned how to control. In Dawnhold, beneath spires carved to catch the morning sun, the council convened in chambers that smelled faintly of incense and old stone. Gold-inlaid floors reflected the dawn's sigil endlessly upward. Light folded back on itself, until it became difficult to tell where illumination ended and vanity began. Michael Bones's name was spoken there like a disease. He undermines the faithful, said High Sage Theros, fingers steepled, not with lies, but with documents. Worse, murmured another, with memory. A robed exorcist stood at the chamber's edge, silent until summoned. Mara Thrin, iron-gray hair bound tight, eyes dark with rites few were permitted to learn. You requested a solution, she said at last, not an execution. The High Sun inclined his head. Correct. Mara stepped forward and placed a scroll upon the table. The parchment shimmered faintly, Nexu threads woven through the ink. The Seraphim Protocol, she said, an exorcist rite of narrative binding. It does not kill the target. Several brows lifted. It defines him, Mara continued, anchors belief. If the world agrees he is a demon, then Nexu treats him as one. If he is a curse, then curses answer him. He becomes what we say he is. And if he resists? Theros asked. Mara's smile was thin. Everything resists. That is why chains exist. No one in the chamber noticed the hesitation that flickered across a single face. Captain Sarah Vale stood near the door, arms folded, armor unadorned by ceremonial excess. She had been summoned to advise, not to vote. She listened, and she felt the quiet growing certainty that something had already gone wrong. You're not planning to bind a pirate, she said carefully. You're trying to preempt something else. Mara's gaze slid to her. You speak beyond your station. I speak from experience, Sarah replied. Bones does not fight like a man trying to survive. He fights like someone trying to shape consequences. The High Sun frowned. Elaborate. Sarah hesitated, then said what had been needling her since Flagler Coast. He acts as though the outcome matters more than his own life. Silence settled. Mara rolled the scroll shut. Then you understand why we must proceed. Michael knew before Clara told him. He felt it in the water. Not storms, he could still stir those, if he wished, but tension. The way currents bent around certain islands. The way the sea seemed reluctant to cross certain thresholds, as if something old and watchful had been disturbed. Clara arrived at the cove with a bruise blooming along her jaw and exhaustion written deep around her eyes. They've authorized it, she said without preamble. Full exorcist sanction. Michael poured her a cup of watered wine. The Seraphim Protocol. Yes. Jonas swore softly. They're not trying to kill you, Clara continued. They're trying to define you, fix you in place. Michael sipped the wine, thoughtful. As what? A demon, a curse, a necessary evil they can point to when the faithful ask why things hurt. Jonas snorted. Convenient. Clara looked at Michael. There are also moving archives. Michael's gaze sharpened. Which ones? The old ones, she said. Pre-dawn, remnant-era charters. Anything that contradicts the myth of immaculate ascension. Michael leaned back. Blackwater Reach. Clara nodded. You know it. I know why it exists, she studied him. You've been there before. Once, Michael replied. Long before the dawn put its symbol on the stones. Jonas folded his arms. Let me guess. You're going to walk into their trap faintly. I'm going to change the story they tell while everyone is watching. Clara's expression tightened. This isn't a skirmish, Michael. If the protocol anchors, it could limit you. Strip options, force you into the shape they need. Michael met her gaze. They can't chain what I've already refused. You're certain? She pressed. He was quiet for a long moment. No, he said honestly, but certainty is what they trade in. I prefer risk. That night, Michael dreamed of depth. Not drowning. He had drowned 1,000 times in 1,000 guises. This was something else. Pressure without water. Weight without substance. He stood in a vast, lightless place, the sea held back by nothing at all. And somewhere far above or far ahead, something tugged, waiting, calling. The successor echo did not speak. It did not need to. It was not a voice, but a direction, a point in the long arc of time where the sea bent toward mortality. Michael woke with salt on his lips and a strange, quiet grief in his chest. You'll do better, he murmured to the dark. You won't have to hide this long. The sea's answer creaked gently around him, hull settling as the tide shifted. The sea did not answer. It never promised comfort. Blackwater Reach rose from the water like a broken tooth, black stones slick with spray and age. The island's cliffs were sheer, gouged by centuries of waves, crowned by the ruins of an old shrine whose architecture predated the dawn's clean lines and gilded sunbursts. Etrus stone, older still, beneath it. Sarah Vale stood at the bow of the Radiant Oath as the island grew large on the horizon. Wind tugged at her cloak. The exorcist stood behind her, robes heavy, faces set. Last chance to turn back, Alara said quietly. Sarah did not look away from the island. He won't, Alara swallowed. Do you believe the protocol will work? Sarah considered the question. I believe it will do something, she said. Whether that's what the council intends is another matter. The exorcist Mara Thrin stepped forward. Captain, remember your role. We need him on the island. The ritual anchors to place as much as belief. Sarah inclined her head. I know the script. She did not add that she had stopped trusting scripts years ago. The lookout's shout carried down the deck. Ship off the starboard bow. Sarah's heart kicked. The sea's answer cut through the swell like a blade, lanterns hooded, sails catching wind that should not have been there. Michael Bones stood on her quarterdeck, coat streaming, one hand resting lightly on the rail. As if the ship were an extension of him. He came, Alara breathed. Of course he did, Sarah murmured. Orders rang out. Dawn ships shifted to intercept. Mages raising hands to conjure wind and wave. Michael Bones altered course, not away, toward them. The sea's answer skimmed past the Radiant Oath so close Sarah could have reached out and touched her rail. Grapnels flew. Ropes snapped taut. Michael crossed the gap in a single, fluid motion. He landed on the Dawn flagship's deck like a man stepping onto familiar ground. Swords hissed free. Nexu flared. Archers drew. Michael raised his hands slowly, palms open. Captain Vale, he said lightly. You invited me. Sarah descended from the quarterdeck, boots striking wood with measured Bones, she said. Up close, he looked less like a demon than the story suggested. Lean, weathered, eyes too sharp for a man who claimed to know banner. You know why you're here, she said. You're going to try to turn me into a monster, Michael replied, very ceremonially across the deck. Mara Thrin stepped forward, eyes cold. Enough. Bring him to the island. Michael looked at Sarah. Before we go, he said quietly, you should know something. Her gaze met his. If this works the way they want, he said, the Dawn won't need faith anymore. Sarah's brow furrowed. Explain. You'll have certainty, Michael said. And certainty doesn't tolerate questions. For a heartbeat, the wind seemed to pause. Then Sarah said, "Take him ashore," through churning water toward Blackwater Reach, cliffs looming overhead. The shrine waited above, broken columns silhouetted against darkening sky. Michael sat steady as stone in the boat, eyes on the rock ahead. "You're calm," Alara said, unable to help herself. Michael smiled faintly. "I've drowned worlds." She blinked. "Relax," he added. "Not today." Sarah watched him carefully. "You know," she said, "if you're lying about any of this, I'll personally make sure you become the story they want." Michael inclined his head. "That seems fair." They reached the steps cut into the cliff, ancient, worn smooth by centuries of feet and water. Above them, the ruined shrine waited, its walls bearing layers of sigils, old ones half erased beneath the dawn's sunburst. Michael paused at the threshold. For just a moment, something like grief flickered across his face. "You've been here before," Sarah said. "Yes," Michael replied softly, "before anyone thought gods should rule." He stepped inside, and the island remembered him. The shrine at Blackwater Reach was older than the dawn, and tired of being rewritten. Its columns rose in a broken ring, stone gnawed smooth by salt and time. What had once been careful Etrus carvings were now a palimpsest. Sunburst chiseled over dragons, sanctified phrases hammered atop vows meant to restrain sanctity itself. Wind moved through the gaps where walls had collapsed, making the place breathe like a living thing. Michael felt it the moment he crossed the threshold. Not recognition. The island did not remember his name. It remembered his kind, the weight of divines who had walked here when gods still believed in restraint. The exorcists moved with ritual precision, forming a circle at the shrine's center. Runes crawled across the stone as they fed Nexu into the old lines, waking wards that had not stirred in centuries. The air thickened, tasting of iron and damp earth. Sarah Vale stood at the circle's edge, arms folded, jaw set. Alara lingered near her, eyes darting, senses stretched thin by the island's strange currents. Mara Thrin raised her hands. "Begin," the chant started low, an undercurrent more than a sound. Words layered atop one another, names woven from rumor and fear, titles the dawn had invented, polished and repeated, until belief hardened around them. Demon, curse, Bone King, Sea's Bane. The runes responded, brightening, threads of Nexu lifting from the stone like grasping fingers. Michael stood at the circle's center, hands relaxed at his sides. He did not fight the pull. He had learned long ago that resistance was a form of consent. Pressure built, not on his body, but on the idea of him. The ritual sought to compress legend into flesh, to define the borders of his existence until Nexu could treat him as a thing with edges. A few sailors gasped. Some swore they saw shadows cling to him. Horns, flames, Michael crown of bone. Just a step. Sarah's hand tightened on her sword. Mara's voice rose. "We call the shape you wear in fear. We call the truth the world agrees upon." Michael lifted his head. His eyes found Sarah's. "Look at me," he said quietly. The chant faltered for half a heartbeat. He repeated, louder now. Sarah did. She saw a man soaked in rain, coat frayed, hands scarred. She saw exhaustion etched deep into lines no legend mentioned. She saw the faint tremor in his left hand, a sailor's injury, old and human. "I am not your demon," Michael said. "I am what happens when gods leave." The words struck the air like a dropped blade. The runes flickered. Mara snarled and forced more Nexu into the weave. "Hold the chant. Anchor him." The pressure surged. For a moment the shadows sharpened. The titles the dawn had spread pressed in, eager to be believed. Michael felt the edge then, not of death, but of choice. He could accept it. He could step into the role they'd written, let the ritual harden him into something monstrous enough to break free later. He had done worse once when the Akuma forced his hand. The sea shifted beneath the island. Not violently. Michael laughed, warningly, low and rough. "No," he said. The word carried, not as a command, but as a refusal so complete it left no room for argument, he said, voice steady as the tide. "I remember what it did to the world. I will not wear your fear." Sarah felt something inside her tilt. She stepped forward. "I see a man," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It carried because it was through the gathered sailors. "A man," someone echoed. Mara screamed a curse and shoved the ritual harder, panic bleeding into precision. The runes flared, then smeared, Nexu threads snapping like overdrawn lines. You cannot bind a god who has already stepped down. The circle collapsed. A shockwave rippled outward, knocking exorcists to their knees. Stone cracked. Lanterns shattered. Wind tore through the shrine, scattering ash and dust. Michael dropped to one knee, breath ripping from his lungs. Alar was there an instant, gripping his arm, hauling him upright. "You alive?" Michael coughed, she hissed, then grinned faintly, annoyingly. Mara Thrin staggered to her feet, blood streaming from her nose, eyes wild. "You've doomed us," she spat at Sarah. "The council." "The council wasn't here," Sarah said, steel in her voice. "I was." She turned to Michael. "You said they moved archives," Sarah said. Michael nodded once. "Show me." Beneath the shrine, the stairs descended into the island's heart. They were narrow, slick with condensation, walls etched with glyphs that glimmered faintly as Michael passed. Old Nexu, sleeping light. The kind that washed intent more than blood. At the bottom lay 3 doors. One bore the daunted dragon of Etris. One bore nothing at all. Sarah studied them. "They'd expect us to choose the dragon. Or the sun," Alara said. Michael's gaze fixed on the unmarked door, the thing they couldn't name. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. The door opened without resistance. Inside, the chamber was small and circular. Shelves carved into the stone held relics no one displayed, broken weapons, rusted helms, chipped chalices. At the center stood a pedestal bearing a single scroll case bound in black leather, wrapped in dull silver chains. Michael stopped. "That's it," he said. Sarah approached carefully, senses alert. The air shimmered around the pedestal, runes faint but attentive. "What kind of trap?" "Intent-bound," Alara murmured, eyes closed as she tasted the Nexu. "If we take it to hoard, it bites. If we take it to reveal..." She opened her eyes. "It sleeps." Sarah looked at Michael. "You first," she said. Michael stepped forward, palms open. "I have no vault," he said softly. "No throne. I will copy this and give it away until no one can pretend it never existed." The runes brightened, just a fraction. Sarah swallowed and reached for the scroll. The chains loosened at her touch, falling away like dead snakes. She unrolled it. The charter inside was older than the dawn, older than the lie the dawn told about itself. It spoke of the remnant, survivors of empire who swore never again to elevate themselves as gods, never again to hoard Nexu, never again to sanctify conquest. It listed vows scratched out in later ink, prohibitions against wealth hoarding, against hereditary power, against declaring any city blessed while others starved. Sarah's throat closed. They hadn't fallen. They had chosen. She rolled the scroll shut with shaking hands. "This will break them," she whispered. "It will hurt," Michael said. She held it out usually does. "Take it," she said. "But if you twist this to suit yourself, I will hunt you to the ends of the sea." Michael accepted the scroll carefully, reverently. "It seems fair," he said. They emerged from the shrine to a sky bruised purple with storm. Mara Thrin waited at the shore, face hard, eyes burning. "You cannot leave with that," she said. Sarah met her gaze. "Watch me." The sea's answer waited just offshore, lanterns dim. Michael paused at the water's edge. "Captain Vale," he said, "our truce ends here." "I know," Sarah replied. "But know this," he continued. "You made a choice tonight. It will cost you." She nodded. "So will obedience." As Michael pulled away into the launch, Sarah watched him go, understanding settling heavy in her chest. This was not a man trying to win. This was a god ensuring there would be a future where gods were no longer needed. The storm broke as Michael Blackbones left Blackwater Reach. Rain lashed the sea into white fury, wind tearing at canvas and rope alike, but the sea's answer cut through it with the confidence of a creature returning to its element. Her hull rode the swell instead of fighting it, her sails catching wind that did not obey the same rules as the dawn's conjured gusts. Michael stood at the stern, the oilskin-wrapped charter pressed flat against his chest beneath his coat. He did not look back. On the island, Captain Sarah Vale remained at the shoreline long after the launch vanished into rain. The exorcist packed up in brittle silence. Mara Thrin did not speak again, not because she had nothing to say, but because she knew how little it would matter now. Worse, it had failed publicly. That mattered. News traveled faster than ships. Within days, rumors ran ahead of Michael's wake along the Flagler Coast. Sailors spoke of a dawn ritual that shattered itself, of an exorcist who bled from the eyes, of a pirate who had stood in a sacred circle and refused to become what he was told to be. In taverns, men argued. Demon, some insisted. Trick of Nexu. Man, others countered. Just a man who scares them. In the fishing village of Low Gresson, copies of a parchment began to circulate, ink still fresh, seals reproduced with meticulous care. The charter was not accompanied by commentary, not framed as accusation or sermon. The Dawn had once sworn not to hoard. Once sworn to step aside when power threatened to become empire again. Back when Celine Morris first gave the order its name, old men wept as they read. Younger ones grew quiet. Some tore the pages up in anger. Others folded them carefully and hid them beneath floorboards like contraband hope. The Dawn responded as institutions always did, with proclamations, with denial. With burn orders, they declared the charter a forgery. They claimed Michael Bones had fabricated it using stolen seals and sorcery. Dawn priests thundered from pulpits that doubt was a weapon of the unrighteous. And still the questions remained, because paper did not argue back. Michael did not linger. The sea's answer moved constantly now, never staying in one port long enough for the Dawn to marshal a clean response. Copies of the charter were smuggled inland through Clara Avery's network. Scribes, traders, clerks who had once believed the Dawn incorruptible and now simply wanted the truth. Clara herself never appeared in the same place twice. She moved like history's shadow, keeping records where she could, burying them where she must. Her ledgers were not grand. They were precise. Dates, names, testimonies. The small facts empires relied upon being forgotten. When Michael met her again, weeks later, it was in a harbor town whose name did not appear on most maps. "You've started a fracture," Clara said, passing him a slim packet of reports. "The council is splintering." Michael scanned the pages. "Good. They're calling you an existential threat now," she continued. "Not to order, to continuity." Michael smiled faintly. "That's generous." Clara studied him. "You're not slowing down." "No. You could," she said carefully. "You've done enough to destabilize the water where fishing boats bob gently, nets heavy with the day's catch." "I remember the forgotten war," he said. "I remember what happens when gods believe stopping is the same as leaving." Clara's jaw tightened. "You're running out of room." "I know." She hesitated. Michael, the echo is getting stronger. "I know." Captain Sarah Vale's world did not end at Blackwater Reach, but it fractured. Reports from Dawnhold arrived weekly, some demanding explanation, others quietly warning her that she was being watched. Promotions stalled, reassignments were discussed, and then abruptly tabled. She read the charter copy Michael sent her in secret. Once, twice. She did not burn it. 12 times. She did not share it openly. She let it sit in her desk like a blade. When orders came not yet ready to draw coastal settlements suspected of harboring Michael's agents, Sarah delayed. When pressed, she asked for verification. When verification did not come, she reduced force. Quiet acts, small fractures, enough to be noticed, enough to be dangerous. The Dawn struck back where they could. They raised bounties. They empowered rival pirate fleets. They sent assassins, not at Michael, but at his network. Dockworkers vanished. Messengers drowned under suspicious circumstances. Entire villages were fined into ruin for sedition by literacy. Michael felt each loss like a stone added to his pockets. He did not rage. He adjusted. He rerouted aid. He sabotaged Dawn supply chains with surgical precision. He made examples of men who burned grain stores while preaching mercy. And when ships sank under his command, he remembered every name. There were nights he stood alone on the deck, sea wind whipping his coat, and wondered how many more deaths he could justify. The echo did not judge him. Vanished entirely.